Hey everyone, Jay Whitner here with Space Headlines. We do a recap each week, what's going on in the space arena. And today we're going to be talking about the second week of March 2019. Our first item is SpaceX. The test flight of Crew Dragon went beautifully from start to finish. To remind everyone, there were no crew members aboard. The crewed test of the system is forecast for the summertime. But the news is everything went great. The mission concluded with all the chutes doing great. It landed appropriately in the Atlantic Ocean, just off Florida's coast. And the recovery ship picked up the Crew Dragon without any trouble. This is a big step toward resuming carrying Americans into space on American rockets from American shores. And this would represent a material monetary issue as well, because right now we're paying the Russians $80 million per person for these flights when we could be supporting American companies instead. So congratulations to SpaceX for a job well done. The NASA administrator, Mr. Bridenstine, praised these efforts by SpaceX, had lots of wonderful things to say about them. And in conclusion, basically, people are talking now about having a test with crew members aboard as early as July, which obviously is very, very soon. So this is great news. It's hard to believe. It's been like 8 years since the last time an American vehicle carried American astronauts into space. So very, very exciting. And we look forward to see how this unfolds. NASA has been working on research about in-space refueling for many years. This goes back to 2011. And we're now in the third phase of this testing. And what this is focused on is liquid methane and how liquid methane can be transferred in space in the microgravity environment. It's especially interesting that they've chosen to focus in on liquid methane. It might have something to do with SpaceX and Blue Origin being so interested in methane fuels. So what's happened fairly recently is late last year, the equipment was carried up to the space station for the phase 3 experimentation. And recently, the astronauts have been assembling all the equipment and getting everything ready for this long-term test to begin with the methane. One component of the test is going to take 6 months. They want to make sure that there's basically the goal is zero boil off, zero loss of these propellants, the liquid methane. So this is very important for us to build a thriving space ecosystem where spacecraft can be refueled in space and use fuel depots and so forth. So stay tuned. The actual testing has not begun yet, but hopefully will begin in the second quarter of the year. And maybe we'll have some good data, by year's end, early next year. The White House released their budget. Of course, part of that was the NASA budget. NASA got a small reduction in their budget, about a $500 million cut. But still, $21 billion is a substantial amount. But for those that don't pay attention to such things, it's less than 0.5% of the U.S. government's budget. So NASA gets a very small slice. But NASA came out okay in this process. The big winners seem to be lunar landers. About $400 million of fresh funding has been focused in the White House budget on development of lunar landers. The big loss seemed to be pertaining to the Space Launch System. The Space Launch System is going to get less funds than it has gotten in the past. And the background on this is the Space Launch System is over budget and it's experienced many delays. So not only does the budget reflect that the first phase of the Space Launch System will be delayed, the second phase the enhanced SLS, which some people call Block 1B, is either going to be pushed years into the future or perhaps not produced at all. So we'll see how that unfolds over time. And it may have to do with how Block 1 fares. Are they able now to stick to the new budget or not? Time will tell whether or not we ever actually produce the second generation of the Space Launch System. Japan and JAXA is the Japanese space agency, their equivalent of our NASA. They made some interesting announcements that they have a plan to put a big pressurized rover on the moon in 2029. Here you see an image, artist rendering of this thing. It's basically about the size of a small RV, and would enable people to travel on the surface of the moon for long distances, and they wouldn't have to wear spacesuits because it's a pressurized vehicle, so they could have long duration exploration missions. And by long duration, it could be really, really long. The range of this thing is projected to be 6,000 miles, which sounds like a whole lot, but also really incredible compared to the capabilities that we had the first time we went to the moon with the Apollo program, and the lunar rovers there had a range of roughly 20 miles. So 6,000 represents a huge leap forward in exploration of the moon. And 2029 is only 10 years away. More news about the Space Launch System, how it impacts everything. NASA made an announcement that really has caught a lot of attention in the space community. NASA is looking at doing the test flight of the Orion capsule, not on the Space Launch System due to the delays, but instead to use commercial vehicles to do this test of sending it around the moon. So what this would look like is, instead of a single launch of the Space Launch System, 2 launches would be required because the commercial vehicles do not have the same throw weight that the Space Launch System has. The candidates are the Falcon Heavy of SpaceX and the Delta IV Heavy, which is from the United Launch Alliance. So either one of them could be used. They could use one of each. So it would require 2 launches and an in-space rendezvous to do it this way. But it would still presumably be far less expensive to do it that way. And once they have uncovered all the tips and traps of how to do this, to use these commercial vehicles instead of the original design, to launch these components and rendezvous these pieces in space, that really would call into question the future of the Space Launch System itself, because it will generally always be more affordable to use 2 commercial vehicles to launch things and rendezvous them in space than to fly the Space Launch System. So time will tell what Congress decides on this, but a lot rests on the ability of the contractors for Space Launch System to start meeting their deadlines and trying to operate within budget. The Russians had a launch of the Soyuz rocket out of Baikonur, and this rocket carried a crew of 3 people. The mission is to take them up to the space station, and this will bring our crew back to 6 people, which is the nominal good amount of people to have on the space station. We were crewed at lower than normal levels because of a problem that happened, I think it was 6 or 8 months ago with the Soyuz rocket. So this worked out fine. So now the space station is back up to its fighting strength of 6. And that's it for our show covering the 2nd week of March 2019. Thanks for your time, and we'll see you soon covering the 3rd week of March. Take care.